It has been a long time since I've seen an anime that has consistently nailed all the qualifications that make an anime so great throughout its entirety, but Attack on Titan has managed to do just that with the final season, only reinforcing my belief that this series will go down in anime history as one of the best ones to have ever come out. There are just so many things that I loved about this season that has elevated this series to a legendary status for me, such as the story switching its focus onto the Marleyan's perspective, depicting the realistic tragedies of a war-torn environment, and also showing the slow decay of Eren's humanity as he forced himself to continue fighting until the bitter end. However, while all these things contributed massively to the greatness of this finale, there was one thing that I noticed during the anime that personally convinced me that I was witnessing a rarity in anime history, which was the narrative's focus on Reiner and the consequences of his past actions catching up to him. Reiner was the perfect character for this finale to revolve around during the beginning of this season, since he encapsulated one of this season's most important thematic statements, which is to show the realistic effects of war on an individual's mental health and how Reiner, being forced to ignite the perpetual cycle of violence at such a young age, molded the broken persona he developed. There is just so much here to unpack and explore furthermore, so with that said, let's talk about my top 3 Reiner moments from this final season that was not only uncomfortable to watch at times, but also made me realize that this may be one of the best finales I have ever seen in my history of watching anime. Number 3. Reiner's family dinner. One of the biggest surprises this season for me that made the narrative a lot more interesting was starting it off by showing the Marleyan side of the story instead of continuing to follow what was happening with Eren and the Survey Corps. This was actually such a smart move in my opinion because it not only gave us a look into what was happening in the world outside of Paradise Island, but it also gave us some much needed insights into the minds of people brainwashed by the propaganda that made the world hate Eldians. Having the narrative focus on the lives of people from Marley showed us how cruelly Eldians were being treated, all because of what their ancestors did. And worst of all, the prejudice against Eldians didn't just happen from people who weren't Eldian, but it became so bad that the Eldians from Marley were even convinced that all the Eldians on Paradise Island were the ones solely responsible for their discrimination. This look into the life of an Eldian was such a sobering reminder for me of the effects of ignorance and blind hatred, and was also the reason why Reiner's family dinner scene in particular was so uncomfortable for me to sit through. Reiner was one of the few Eldians from Marley who got to experience what the people from Paradise Island were really like, and as a result, he came to realize that the role he was initially playing among what he perceived as the Island Devils to get closer to capturing the founding Titan had developed into him creating genuine relationships with regular people who were all just naturally fighting for their lives. However, as positive as this message may seem, Reiner didn't come to this conclusion unscathed. The propaganda for the hate against Eldians was so ingrained into him that he had developed an identity crisis while blending in with the people from Paradise Island and came back to Marley in a state where he couldn't come to terms with what was really right and what was really wrong. This is why when Reiner's family asked about his experiences on Paradise Island, that it made me literally cringe when he described his former comrades not as Island Devils like he was taught growing up in Marley, but as humans who are not all as evil as the people from Marley were taught to believe. Now, I'm not sure if Reiner did this on purpose or if the deterioration of his mental health came into play during this conversation, but nonetheless, Reiner inadvertently challenged the Marleyan propaganda against Paradise Island right in front of his family, and the reaction from his mother's face as she listened to her son do so made this one of the most brilliant scenes of the season. Number 2. Eren and Reiner meet in the cellar. Another part of the reason why I love this final season was because it showed the consequences of Reiner's actions in the past finally catching up to him, and when Reiner met Eren in the cellar, this scene was so uncomfortable for me to watch because of their conversation about why they both ended up in this situation. While Reiner may have been surprised to have seen Eren and Marley, once he realized why Eren was there, it was heartbreaking to see Reiner become so remorseful for feeling like he created the monster that sat before him. What was also so jarring about Reiner's actions when he saw Eren once again was that instead of immediately fighting back and restraining Eren, he begged for Eren to end his life and pass judgment onto him, almost as if he was waiting for this very moment to get his just dues for failing everyone he knew and adding so much pain and suffering to the world. Throughout this season, we've seen how much Reiner was struggling to cope with knowing too much about both sides of the war, to the point where he even attempted suicide. And so, seeing Reiner in such a sad state just made me feel incredibly bad for him. As for Eren, while it was so chilling to see that he would finally get his revenge for what happened to his hometown years ago, what was even more terrifying was the fact that Eren was still going to carry out his plan even after getting to know the Marleyans and Eldians he always thought of as just his enemies. After spending some time infiltrating Marley, Eren understood that not all of them were bad. However, the most poignant part of this conversation with Reiner that made this whole situation even more uncomfortable was that he still felt compelled to continue fighting just as Reiner once did. One of the most interesting themes of this scene for me was seeing that the cycle of violence continued all because of the lies, hatred, and self-preservation that pervaded every single inch of this world, and something that I think Eren felt like he couldn't escape. This is why I believe Eren felt like there was no other choice but to fight and keep moving forward until all of his enemies were destroyed, and why this message that peace cannot be achieved until one side is utterly defeated made this whole conversation very uncomfortable. Number 1. Gabi and Falco call out for Reiner's help. The reason why this scene in particular became my number 1 moment that made me the most uncomfortable was because it cleverly put me into a conflicting position where I desperately wanted to cheer on and support the characters I once saw as the villains, and it was all thanks to this season's focus on the Marleyan's perspective and the deterioration of Reiner's mental health. One of the most important messages I've noticed this season was trying to get across was developing empathy and understanding for people with opposing views and beliefs. And this season did this through showing that the people who lived on Marley were just that. Regular people who are not that much different from the people living on Paradise Island. Even though the people from Marley were taught very discriminatory beliefs about Eldians, these people became less blatantly evil throughout the season after the narrative forced us to experience their most humane moments with them, whether that be seeing how happy the war unit was after stuffing their faces with delicious food, or seeing the pain and suffering on the faces of innocent people from Marley as the once known heroes of the story caused a catastrophe on their homeland. I honestly believe that this switch up of the narrative's perspective from the people on Paradise Island to the people from Marley was one of the most smartest things Attack on Titan has ever done, simply because it forced me to stop looking at this whole war as just a battle between good versus evil, but instead question the reason for both sides continuing to fight each other in the first place. As for the other reason why I love the Gabi and Falco scene, in the previous seasons, we've seen Reiner developing a personality disorder in order to cope with the emotional trauma of causing so much pain and suffering to the people he grew to like on Paradise Island. And during the final season, Reiner's condition worsened as he lost his will to live, all because he couldn't continue carrying this heavy burden. The way in which this season showed Reiner's health getting worse in painstaking detail massively contributed to my sympathy for him, because this season made me realize that the reason he ended up this way was really not his fault. Reiner was just a kid who felt forced to continue this mission to initially take back the Fighting Titan because he couldn't understand that he had any other choice, and Reiner was once again put in this position to continue fighting when every one of his comrades were getting destroyed. Although the situation was kind of different now that Reiner was an adult and he knew the futility of the endless fighting, I believe Reiner only continued fighting when Gabi and Falco were crying for his help was because he saw these kids as the last vestige of hope left for the world, and that they could change the future. And so, seeing him transform into the Armored Titan just for them made the seed so much more epic because of that reason. Alright, anime lovers, that is going to be it for my top 3 Reiner moments that may be the most uncomfortable during this final season of Attack on Titan. So before you guys go, let me know in the comments below some of your favorite moments from this final season, and also please be sure to leave a like on this video to help me out, and subscribe to see what I'm going to be doing next in the future. So thank you, anime lovers, for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next review.